Oh, yes, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back into Snow the Goalie, the Only Flyers podcast. And it's been a week. It has been a week. I don't even know how to start this, guys. The Flyers are bad, right? Like they're supposed to be bad. And they've won 6 of 7. And Chuck Fletcher probably is going to keep his job now. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. So I'm just going to throw it to you guys first. Let me lead with our dear pal, Chris Terrian, Bundy. Find him on Twitter at CTerrian6. How are you? And can you please make sense of what the hell has happened in this past week?
Well, you know what? I always said like hockey in a lot of ways is, first of all, Russ, congratulations. I know we'll talk more about it. A new dad again, Anthony. This guy is just an absolute a kid fact pumping machine right over there. This guy's a factory. I know what it's like, Russ. I got 4 too, buddy. So who am I to talk?
I know I'm the short one with 3.
You're right, Anthony.
There's still time, Ant. There's still time. I talked to a delivery nurse who said that there was a 75-year-old dad in at Penn Medicine not that long ago. So. I mean, I know, like you're what 72, but like you still have a few years there, Ant.
Anyway, congrats on your busy week, Russ. It's been a great week. It's been an unbelievable week. And so what's happened is here's what I think has happened. Just going back and using references from my past or when I'm thinking of times that were either like up or down in my career. So I think what happened was when they started this, and we'll throw the Toronto game out. Toronto was the best team they played of these 7 games, right? Like they've won 6 of 7. Toronto was the best team they played. They were coming in the second night of a back-to-back. The Leafs were, the Flyers were kind of waiting on them, and Toronto gave them a pretty good smack in terms of the scoreboard, 6-2. But what happened was when the Flyers went out west, they started with San Jose. They did. When you get on a roll, usually you get a couple of bad teams where they're more vulnerable. And if you're not a top team either, they ended up winning those games. They started feeling good about themselves. They snuck out the game. And I was joking about it, like, as we were saying on Twitter, like, the Flyers about to get through the 3-headed California monster. It's not a 3-headed monster at all. It's a 2.5-headed monster, really, because it's a one-headed monster of the 3 teams now because LA might be the only quasi-good team. And I'm not sure how they're winning, but they are. So the Flyers got on a roll. They caught fire. They came home. The schedule was conducive to it too, right, Ant? Like you couldn't look at another 6 or 7 game window in the season, and I did, where you're like, where could the Flyers possibly go find 12 points out of an available 14? And it may continue from here on in. You play Buffalo this week. Buffalo's awful. They can't win a game right now. They're falling. They lost the next night. I think, again, they got shut out again at home to maybe like a Nashville or somebody like that. So they're playing teams where it's opportune, prime picking to get beat. They're also feeling good about themselves. And to be honest with you, I think we hinted about this just in light conversation before. Their top guys are scoring. Like Konecny's getting it done, like again, whether he's not a first-line player on a championship team. He's not. Nobody's going to tell me he is. He's having a career year. But he's getting it done. Scotty Lawton's done a good job on the power play. They're scoring goals. And the last part of this for me, and maybe I've missed a couple things, Ersan, the goalie. When you get a new goalie come in, it kind of gives you like a little bit of wind to change behind you a little bit where you're like, wow, we won with the guy. We're feeling good. It can happen for a stretch of time. Well, whether we have a good, we talked about it last week, in terms of what they look like they're going forward, what that looks like entirely beyond what a small sample size is. I don't know the answer to that, but he's played well. The Flyers have had opportunistic goals. They've had good comebacks. And as a result, you've won 6 out of 7 games combined with your better players being at the top of their game. And having some opponents that you've had an opportunity to suffocate because they're worse than you are. But that being said, the Flyers have been an entertaining team to watch. They have played well. They've had good goals. Owen Tippett is I'm starting to become a believer now, a little bit more in that trade. As we talked about the Giroux thing. I would have sold Giroux. I'm glad they got that for him because at the end of there, with an expiring contract, they're lucky they got anything for him, to be quite honest with you, coming off a non-playoff team for 2 years. So he's been great. Ended up being a good move. Looks like it's going to get better, but there's been a lot of things that have come together to win 6 of 7. And the one thing I will tell you, all the things that have made those 6 of 7 come together could all go the other way and the wheels could come off really quickly as well. And that's what happens with a team. And I'll stop with this. As you're climbing, or you have a coach that's got you in the driver's seat to do some really cool things when you're not supposed to do them. They're doing those things right now, but I wouldn't expect it to sustain, because I just don't think this is a level of sustainability with the personnel on this current team as it sits. But while it's here, it's been a lot of fun to watch, and it's been very, very uplifting if you're a Flyers fan that wanted to see change and wanted to see good things happen in the 2022, the 23 season. You're seeing them right now, and that is a good thing.
And of course, somebody who always appreciates change, Anthony Sanfilippo. Find him on Twitter at AntSanPhilly. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing fantastic. It was good to be down there the other night, Russ, for the Washington game. That was the one game out of this stretch that I thought that they were most impressive. I kind of like Bundy. You know, you roll your eyes a little bit that they beat the teams out in California. I mean, Anaheim's not even an NHL team. The Sharks aren't much better. LA, even though they have a winning record and sit in a playoff spot, their goal differential, they're a minus team. So, I think that eventually comes down as well. I'm not certain that they ultimately are a playoff team. And then, of course, they beat Arizona and Buffalo, who are also not great teams, right? So it's like, okay, but the Washington game, like that was the first time like they went against a legitimate team in this stretch, against a legitimate team and played better than them. They really played better than Washington. I know Washington has had a couple of injuries lately, getting guys back into the lineup like Backstrom and Tom Wilson, and they're just trying to get their feet under them. They don't have John Carlson in the lineup, right? So Washington's not a complete team yet. But, they did a real nice job. I mean, you get Carter Hart stoning Ovi on a breakaway, and that was really Ovechkin's only real good chance of the game. They really kind of kept Washington to the outside for a lot of the game. There were a couple of mistakes that led to the Washington goals ultimately, but really when it was a lot of 5-on-5 play, the Flyers played well. Power play gets a goal. Technically two. I mean, Konecny's empty netter was a power play goal. They got a goal shorthanded. So like they really, in all phases, played a really, really strong game. And to Bundy's point that he just made at the end, even the coach recognizes where they are and what they're doing. And I want to just read a couple things here so that, don't want to get people too excited, because, you hear some of the media are asking questions like, oh, you're only 7 points out of a playoff spot now. Can you guys get back into a playoff spot? And it's like, pump those brakes, man. Pump those brakes, because, we can get into the specifics, but I mean, Pittsburgh's got 2 games in hand, so that 7 can become an 11 real fast. You got to jump over 5 teams that are in front of you in the standings. You're not going to keep winning 6 out of 7. You got to play some good teams coming up, right? I mean, there's some real challenges on the schedule. You're not going to keep winning all these games. And ultimately, you can't be a 500 team and make up the difference here, right? I mean, so and even if they are a 500 team, they're not going to be able to win enough games to get back into the play. So let's pump the playoff brakes. But here's what Torts had to say. I still think we have things to do. When you could call your team this, whatever that identity is, whatever word you want to use, it needs to be consistent. Consistent isn't 2 weeks. Consistent, quite honestly, isn't just the regular season. Consistent is when you get to the playoffs and you're doing it there. So listen, I'm happy with some of the progression of the players. I think they're feeling really good offensively. I think they're allowing themselves to play offensively. We've lost a little stiffness defensively. I think we need to improve on that. But as I said, as each day goes by here and they get some results in this little pocket, hopefully they can rely on it when they get to a little jam. You're not going to get me to talk about where we are yet. We just haven't been doing it for long enough. And then later, he says this, and this was actually a question that I asked, talking about reading plays. They look like they're reading the plays really well. And he says, when you're getting some puck luck and you're getting some success, especially the offensive guys, it just seems to come easier to you. So hopefully it stays. The key part of the National Hockey League is to ride the wave as long as you can in momentum as far as how we're playing. There's going to be a time where we're going to get kicked again, and we're going to try and stay away from it as long as we can. But when we do, how quickly can we get out of that? That's the key in trying to get where you want to be after a regular season, is how long you can keep the momentum on your side. When you lose it, how quickly can you get it back? we'll see what happens. So he doesn't sound like a coach who's like supremely confident that this team is going to be able to maintain any kind of success that like it's having right now.
Yeah, losing 10 in a row will do that. I think, honest to God, I noticed a different Torts after the 10-game losing streak. Like, he went kind of like batshit. Like, I mean, he started going all over the place with his verbalizations of players, benching guys, sitting them out. And I think that he actually realized, like, this is just me. But I think I've seen enough of his personality and, an ego and mannerisms over the years. I think he was like, holy shit, I'm a really good coach, and we just lost 10 games in a row.
Yeah.
And I really, honestly, God, I think he took that so personally, not that he couldn't get them over the top, but that they actually had a team that was capable of him being the coach he is and still having the ability to lose 10 in a row. I think he was actually – I don't think he knew what we knew, and we said it this summer. I don't think he knew what he was coming into. I don't. And I think you have to see it to believe it. But I will say one thing. He's gotten them to a different level in terms of the way they're playing, and this is what he does. And if you're Russ last summer talking, well, I don't want a good coach here. I don't want a good coach, because this is what he does. He makes your team that much better. And if you're that bad a team, and again, I don't like playing, and I've said this before, I don't like playing hockey for some 18-year-old kid that's, may or may come in and turn your franchise around. I mean, the last 18-year-old phenom we've seen has been in 8 years in Edmonton, and he hasn't seen a goddamn playoff of a Stanley Cup sniff at all. And you know what else? He may not again this year. They might not even make the playoffs in Edmonton. So if you're starting to lay all your cards out on the line for that number one pick that you think is going to bring you all the glory, it might for your season ticket holders. Historically, it's usually been a good omen up until Sidney Crosby, with generational type players. I'm giving McDavid still got time left, but I don't want to play my schedule to try to get an 18-year-old. John Tortorella will never do that. He'll never do that. And that's why I think the 10-game loser to him was like, wow, this is really, really bad. And it's going to take an extraordinary job for me to kind of find. And remember, that's right about the time he said, well, we need to find out what we got here.
Yeah.
And what's salvageable and what's not. And I think he's finding out at the top of the food chain, especially the forwards. The forwards, especially the top guys, Lawton and Konecny, they've been terrific. They've been terrific. So if you can find a revelation out of it, if you can find a way to have built Travis Konecny into the player that they've been waiting for 7 years, then John Tortorella has done his job. Same with Scotty Lawton's been great. I've always been a fan of Lawton. TK made too many mistakes for me to put enough bank in him over time. They say, like, I can't have a guy out there with 2 minutes left in a game if I can't trust him that he's not going to put a puck into the middle of the ice and turn it over. He's been better at that. So I give Torts a lot of credit, but there's something about the end of that 10-game span, and Anthony, you'd see it being around there, that absolutely changed in his demeanor, the way that he's addressed everybody.
Yeah, no, you're. I think you're right. I think that was a turning point in a lot of ways for how he was going to approach or presenting his team, both publicly and privately. I think that's when we got into the situation where he was really talking about the rebuild, finally using that term, right? I think he used it in an interview, and I think that's when you started to really see Torts identifying players that he liked and players that he maybe doesn't like, and who he wants to keep here and who he doesn't want to keep here. I do think that there is some benefit. There is benefit, like Bundy is saying, to them having a little bit of success and being more competitive right now. I think that what you're seeing is that there are players that you can say, we're going to have them here when we try to get good, right? And if you look at it, you mentioned Lawton and Konecny. I mean, obviously, I think that Owen Tippett. You briefly talked about him. Yeah. Guy he can skate, and he's got a hell of a shot. I think he's going to be a power forward in this league. He's Also not a top line guy, but he can be a second line winger and get you 25 to 30 goals and be a real. I mean, he drew 3 penalties against Washington just because he's moving his feet, right? I mean, a very simple thing. You always hear coaches say that, move your feet, and you're thinking, well, of course, guys are playing hockey. They're going to skate, right? Of course they're moving their feet. But he starts right away and draws the penalties on those. So I think that there's another player. I think ultimately, I mean, Noah Cates is playing top line center. He's not a top line center, but ultimately he's going to be a good third line center, right? I mean, and you put him on a line with, say, Lawton and maybe Wade Allison, who's starting to show a little bit of that third line ability. Maybe that becomes a good third line for you, right? And so then you got a Konecny and you got a Tippett. So you got pieces. You're still missing 3 or 4, top end forwards, and you hope Cutter Gauthier becomes one. Okay, fine. But you still are missing that. And you got good stuff in goal. You have Carter Hart, who's been playing really well, Toronto game aside. And Urson's really had a hell of a start to his NHL career. So you feel good that you have good depth there, right? Great. The blue line. This is where my concern is, Bundy. I mean, obviously you need talent up front. We know this. Torts keeps saying it, and that's obvious.
Notice how I didn't mention the defense yet?
Well, but yeah, and this is the thing. So here's where I'm at with this. The problem what I have on defense is that they're not individually bad players, because they're not. They're all okay. It's just that there's so much money tied into your blue line right now that you can't improve it unless you get rid of guys and bring in new players. And I'm not certain that they have the depth in the organization to sit there and say, well, we have this next guy who's going to come in and be better than someone we have right now. Might Zamula be better than Nick Seeler? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, but to me, Zamula is at best second pair, but probably third pair guy. You have the kid in Sweden, Emil Andre, who knows what he's going to be when he gets over here. But I mean, he's at least a prospecty type. But I mean, again, I think high ceiling is a second pair. I ultimately think Cam York is a second pair guy. He's not a top pair guy. So, I mean, you got a lot of guys who fall into that 3 to 6 range, but nothing really at the top. I mean, Provorov is still what he is. And playing those minutes, but we've come to the determination he's not a 1.
No.
Maybe a 2, but not a 1. And so therefore, that to me is the spot where you have too much money tied up in just okay players.
Yeah, and again, I'm not here like to assess them, but I mean, there are guys like Sergachev, right, in Tampa.
Right.
He's a second pair guy all day long. If you put him as a top pair guy, they would be a different team.
Right.
So that's a part of the defenseman. I didn't mention we talked about like those high guys, like the forwards that have really elevated the game, like TK and Lawton. Who knows? I mean, do you have to go to the well to take the 2 guys that have absolutely done the most this year to try to turn the ship around and say we may have to trade one of those forwards to get a package in to try to get everything in line. The problem is that we have 3 guys, 3 guys on defense for the Flyers. None of them are a number 1 defenseman that are all in really long-term contracts. And that's a major problem. You cannot win in the NHL if you don't have good defensemen. You can't. You can sit there all day long and try to sell defensemen to the general public and tell your fans that, oh, we're coming. If you don't have good D, you can't win. It doesn't matter. You can have the best forwards in the world. If your D are not up to par, and I'm not saying this is the Flyers. I'm just saying in general. You can have the greatest 12 forwards in NHL history. If you've got 6 average defensemen, it doesn't matter. It does not matter. Mm-hmm. And that's a harsh reality. But again, I think what will have to happen and this is a reality. I mean, those defensemen they cannot be here for the whole rebuild. It's just impossible. Unless nobody takes them, right? So that's why they're hoping some of them play really well, so you can probably start considering shopping them, whatever that looks like. And your number 1 defenseman of the future might not even be a 21-year-old kid yet. You don't know that. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. You have all these kids here, 25 now. The defenseman that we're talking about, that number 1, he may not even exist right now in terms of the minds of who those people are. So that's why it's so important that you get your draft picks right when you got an opportunity to pick high. And if you can get a guy, like we were talking about Desjardins this week. Sorry for going off today, Anthony. I'll let you jump. We're talking about Eric Desjardins today. That's a goddamn dream trade for a general manager for Bob Clark when he made it, right? You get a guy who comes in who's a bona fide number one, and he ends up calming the entire defense corps for 10 plus years. Plus, I had a hell of a good partner out of him. But you know what? That's the kind of thing that everybody hopes you get. But man, it's harder and harder to find guys like that because they are really, truly the diamond in the rough. You get a number one defenseman that's hopefully homegrown, or if you can find one in a trade where you could sneak one in on someone, you got yourself a good team for 10 years, guaranteed.
And here's your I guess your sobering moment of the episode is you ride the high of 6 of 7, and then you look at cap friendly. So to what you guys have been talking about, if you look at next year, you've got Provorov at $6.75 million. You've got Ristolainen on a 5-year deal at $5.1 million.
Crazy.
You've got another year of Tony DeAngelo at 5. You've got Travis Sanheim, whose extension is going to kick in, $6.25 million. Between those 4 players alone, you've got over $23 million on the books for 4 defensemen. And if we're being honest about it, Provorov is probably a second-pair defenseman. Ristolainen is probably a third-pair defenseman. DeAngelo, I don't know. And then Sanheim is like a tweener. That's what you have. And there's nothing in the pipeline that makes it like where on the forward front, you look and you say, hey, Gauthier looks like he could be promising. And like, even though you have the ability to look at more forwards just by virtue of there being more forwards on the roster, where you can look at like a Tippett or an Allison and say, all right, like there are positive signs here, or no Cates. And you can say, all right, like these guys are good second line players, or good third line players. And we need to, add that top line talent. The Flyers don't have that flexibility right now, and they don't have that pipeline in defense. So you look at it and you go, that's a lot of money to be tied up. And if we're basing it on this year's numbers, the entirety of the 7 defensemen who are rostered is just under 30%. Those 4 guys alone on their current deals, that's before Sanheim's money jumps from 4.65 to 6.25, comes out to be 612, 20, 20.5, 26.2% of the cap is tied up in 4 defensemen, none of whom are particularly great at anything, which now I guess is probably about as good as we can get to something that Anthony wrote this past week about the guy who was supposed to be the number one defenseman, the one that this team was so sold on as being the number one defenseman going forward, that Ron Hextall chose to take Nolan Patrick over Cal McCarr.
Yeah,
Heiskanen,
and that one defenseman would have changed everything. That's what I'm trying to say. When they brought Desjardins in, he transformed the look of the entire defense. That's why I said this week at Twitter, hey, we need to try to get Rico on here to explain, what he meant to the team, talk about our partnership, because I know he'd have great things to say about it, but also how the dynamic. We've talked a lot about getting the chemistry with players. Sometimes things just fit that you can't explain. There's no rhyme or reason to it, But, and understanding who you are amongst that group. I understood very clearly that I was like a good Robin to Batman. And that's exactly, but you have to know that. And you have to understand that. And you can't think that you're something you're not. If you think you're Wayne Gretzky and you end up being, me as an offensive player, well, then you know what you're getting. That's what it is. I'm not that. But that's an understanding of players. But one defenseman was my point. If you get one guy who can solidify it, you have salvageable pieces back there that you can plug in. To me, Provorov needs a Desjardins.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
Yep.
He needs a Desjardins. He's not the Desjardins. He needs a Desjardins.
Right, which is why he's not a number one.
That's
a number
right.
one defenseman makes his partner better, makes his team better.
Yes.
He needs someone to make him better.
Yes, but nothing detracting against him. He can also, with his skill set, make that top guy a good player as well.
Correct.
And that's what Rico, that's what I would say to you. Rico made me a great player, but I didn't do anything out of the realm to be somebody I wasn't. Right. And he would tell you that I was the perfect set for him because I would stay back. I could skate. We moved the puck well together. It just worked. But that's what I'm trying to say is that if you could find that one guy, you could salvage a Provorov to put him in, to place him and slot him accordingly on a top pair. Then you'd
But
be
so
able
much-
to slide the other two guys down accordingly to where they are. Everybody on defense right now is playing in a role they shouldn't be playing in without the according help that they should have had that I was lucky enough to have. And I hope everybody understands I'm saying this so humbly. I was not a star player. I was a good skating defenseman. Didn't kill guys when I played, but was smart enough to play 10 years with the top dog. And as Homer said, so Paul Homer used to say, sometimes you have to be as smart or smarter to play that role. And I'm telling you, if Chuck can find that number one guy, there's salvageable pieces on the defense. But the way it's going right now, you can't turn something into something that it's not, even if you think it is.
Well, you also need the players to have a true and fair understanding of their actual worth and what their skill sets are, and to not have an overinflated self-ego or self-worth.
But that's the world we live in now. Everybody thinks they're better than they are. They're all told how great. You should see minor hockey, Russ. Go to a minor hockey rink and listen to these fucking parents tell their kids, oh, little Johnny is so special. He's going to be in. And I'm like, you guys are just living in an alternate reality. Hockey parents, I said, are the dumbest people I've ever met. I've been one of them. I have lots of friends. I love them. They're living in an alternate reality. So, but that's the problem. These kids are told how great they are from the time they're 10, that when they do actually make it, they still think they're 10 and they're the greatest player in the team. You got to adjust.
In the case of Provorov, though, through multiple coaches, he was given that role as the top defenseman on the power play. He was given the ability to play in all situations. He was leaned on as a young player to do this, to carry that load, to carry that burden. And that inherently is going to make a guy think that he's better than he is, or make a guy think that he's ready. And I think that maybe more than anything has been the biggest detriment to his development, is that I don't think there's ever been a question about if Ivan Provorov is motivated to get better. Like, we've always heard the stories about, he's out training, in the offseason, he's training like a psycho because he wants to come in and he wants to be the guy the team can rely on. But the problem is, like, if you don't have it, you don't have it. And you can work your ass off as much as you want, but eventually you're going to hit your ceiling. And unfortunately for this team, that ceiling isn't what they needed it to be. It's not the ceiling that Ron Hextall thought it was going to be.
Look,
and that I think is the biggest problem they've got, because barring a trade by Chuck Fletcher to like get a number one defenseman,
I'll tell you,
I don't have a lot of faith in, because the last one he tried played 5 games, and now it's going to be LTIR from now until the end of time. I
got to tell you this quick story, guys. When I was broadcasting, I was doing TV. The true story. We get a call. The broadcasters, Ron Hextall wants to meet the broadcasters. He wants to see us, which is rare. I don't say anything when I'm broadcasting. I call it the way it is. There's no bullshit, ever. Like, it's like this. It's probably why I'm doing this. Anyway, Jim Jackson would call the games, and he'd have like Provorov, like he'd think it was Paul Coffey, and Ghost was, Ray Bork. And I'm like, I'd be down there. I'm like, this is just ridiculous. Like, I thinking to myself, JJ, shut up. And I know Jonesy thought the same thing. And I'm thinking, like, you're selling these kids as 19-year-old kids as these future pedigrees. And I said, I didn't think that they were that. And I would tell them all the time, I don't think that these are the guys that you're trying to sell them. And I don't think it's fair that you do. So one day, out of the blue, Hextall calls a meeting and says, you guys need to stop. He wasn't saying it really to me, or he was probably talking to JJ, going, we need to stop glorifying Provorov and Gostisbehere. Like, enough. You guys, you're selling them like they're Bork and Coffee. And they weren't. You have to let guys play at that age. You got to let them at least get their wings under them. I understand the broadcast works in conjunction with the team. That's the bullshit that I never wanted to sell to the fans, and I never did. And if Cale McCarr's here and he's Bobby Orr or Paul Coffey, I'll tell you. I'll let you know. But those are the issues that guys are told. They hear it in their heads and they start believing it. And it's a problem. And it took a GM to probably watch one too many hockey games and say, all right, enough's enough, and knock it off. So a lot of egos become involved.
How often
in the
did that happen, though, Bundy?
Industry.
When as a broadcaster, how often did you have a front office executive, try to influence the messaging of a player?
Never, not for me. Like, I'd have guys like say something like, I had Paul Holmgren, and we were, I'd been there, but they knew that I was a no nonsense, no bullshit guy. I was going to tell them what I saw on the ice, what I see in front of me on a nightly basis, and then I try to show a big picture based on one single game at a time that I watch these guys play. Then I make an assessment at the end of the year what kind of a season they had. Believe me, I had bad seasons too. First guy to tell you. Bad games, awful games. Turn pucks over up the middle, no question. But again, those are errors you make in a season and stuff like that. But no, I didn't. When I broadcast it, I call it the way it is. I think a lot of people do these jobs to keep their jobs and try to sell it. But I think you have to be honest. I just really think you just have to be honest broadcasting. And I think that's the best way to do it. But Hextall, I did, Russ, I'll be honest with you. That was the only time personally that I'd had like a general manager actually talk about messaging and saying to maybe not so much myself or Jonesy, but you guys are getting it wrong. You're getting it totally wrong and it needs to stop. And he was angry about it. But it just gives you a little bit of an insight. Paul Holmgren, he was there all those years. He never once said anything. He says, if I listen to you, he goes, you do a good job. That's all I want to hear. That's all you want. But, you get people, but there are teams, I would imagine, he's saying like to the broadcasters here, here's the messaging we want in these guys. But you can't call a guy a superstar if he's just a star. It's not fair to the player.
So let's kind of flip this to the forwards. So Travis Konecny's having this breakout season, right? Like the best season of his career. And there's a question, and I think it's a question that is probably fair to some extent. It's a question that like comes up a lot, especially with bad teams. You have that question of, is this player a decent player on a good team? Is he a good player or a great player on a bad team? Where does he fall? Like how well do these skills translate? And how much does this production translate? Because no matter what, even if you're on a terrible team, somebody has to score the goals. Somebody has to record points. It has to happen. I guess, Bundy, like I want to tap into the player brain here, okay? Because I would assume that if you're an opposing coach and you're coming to town to take on this team, one of, if not the player right now that you're trying to scheme to stop in some way, shape, or form is Travis Konecny. At least in the way that he's played, say, the last 10 games. So as a player, if that is the case going into a game, how much can you really do to limit him? And if he still manages to produce as like the only guy who really can at that level, does it prove that maybe he is better than just being, the quote unquote good player on a bad team?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously if he's dealing with checking responsibilities, obviously, when at home it's gonna be a little bit easier because they're gonna get the matchup and the favorable side for him. But I mean, listen, I'm not going to detract from a guy no matter what the case is. He's playing really, really well. He's going to the front of the net. He's been opportunistic. That's a good question, Russ. We've seen an all-star version of Konecny before. But not like this. This is easily his best year. It's not even close. And he looks like a revamped player. There's certain guys, right, Anthony, like where you look at John Tortorella and he has them, and then he does well with guys. And then there's players, they're terrible with them, like that do not respond at all. So you can say what you want about Konecny, but he's responded to whatever Torts has brought to him. And even Kevin Hayes, same thing with Kevin Hayes. He's got the long-term contract situation here, but there's some guys that have really risen up and answered and responded to what Torts has had. I mean, Konecny, remember early in the year, was it November? He got benched, right? Like without glory in that. I mean, and people are thinking in Philly, because all we knew then was the previous version of Travis Konecny, right? We didn't see this one. We didn't know. We didn't have, he had only maybe 6 goals at the time, which was good, but Torts thought there was something else there. So he's gotten to him. Do I think he's a top-line player in a Stanley Cup team? No, of course not. But is he a second or third line guy? If he gets up, is playing the way he is on a Stanley Cup team, could he be a second line guy? Yeah, maybe. Yeah, but I don't think he's not a top line Stanley Cup guy.
The interesting thing I think on Konecny is and Torts brought this up, was the work that he's doing, extra work he's doing with Briere, where Danny has actually sat down with him and showed him some video. and showed him that he was a player who played too much to the outside. And Bundy, I know there's a lot of technical stuff that kind of ties into this, but as a former player, you understand what he was saying, but that Konecny needs to play more to the inside on his. So instead of just standing out on the wing and just firing pucks on net, you're like, oh, well, he's getting shots. They're just not going in. Instead, he's making a play with the puck. And maybe it's throw it to a teammate and then drive to the net and get in front. Even though he's a smaller player, if you go to those areas, he's going to get the puck back and have a better chance of scoring from there than he was from, outside on the circle, right? Or outside the circle. So, and there's definitely been an element of that to his game this year that was not there before. And I think that that's probably why you're seeing more production from him. He still makes some of the same mistakes that he used to make before, trying to do something that maybe he shouldn't. But there's a lot more of him doing the things that Danny used to do when he played, and you were like, well, how is this little guy getting in there? I mean, but he does not be afraid to get in that blue paint area and just whack at pucks while they're there and, drive the net and get some goals.
Yeah, I mean, he's done a better job. I don't remember Danny being the fiercest middle of the ice guy, but
no, but he would. In other words, he would come. What I'm trying to say is he would come off. He would beat his man off the wall and drive towards the net so that he's got space.
Great example the other night. I will say one thing. So a perfect example of leading things. I'm just trying to think of Briere because when I think of Danny offensively, I just think of a power play side guy that would score down low around the net and very, very clever. Konecny. So the goal the other night, I'm trying to remember, was a home game. Or was the one before it. He made a quick play down low. It was right. Maybe it was Farabee. Was it Farabee behind the net?
And then he goes to the front.
Konecny down. So it's involved in that is more so than just going to the net. It's actually finding the soft area where there's an opening for that much time that he did. Right. And that, as an evolution that's taken a long time for him, but that's why he's starting to be rewarded. Right. I remember Berube, we always used to talk, and I know this is a defenseman. When I talk to forwards, if you want to make life hard, just go into the middle of the ice on a defenseman. It's the worst thing you can deal with mentally because your head's swerving. Is there a guy coming there? Who's going to be in front? Is my partner covering the middle? Where, do I leave this guy to the outside? Oh, I have a tracker coming. The defenseman. So there's a million things the defenseman's saying. So I always tell people, if you can play the game of hockey as a good forward between the hash marks, get to that front of that net somehow. Nobody hits anymore. I mean, I used to see guys get cross-checked in the mouth for going to the front of the net 25, 30 years ago. It's probably why everybody's got CTE. But you know what? Nonetheless, nobody does that anymore. They get into the front of the net, and no one touches them, and there's an available loose puck for them. But that's the harsh reality of the game. And it's a lot easier than it once was, and Konecny is figuring it out. That was a great example the other night of behind the net, out front, and everything.
Yeah. It's interesting, too, because, if I remember back to, the bubble year, I think it was the bubble year, one of the things that we kind of bantered back and forth about was putting Konecny in, the net front role on the power play and letting him kind of play that dirty, gritty role and collect pucks and kind of, roof him kind of, I don't know, maybe a little bit Briere-esque, but just being kind of tenacious and being a pest and being a pain in the ass and good things can happen. And here we are a few years later and the role fits,
it does.
His game has evolved and he play in a way. I don't know if it's fair to say that he plays bigger, but he's not afraid of contact. Whereas a guy like James Van Riemsdyk is a big body who is not a fan of contact.
As somebody once said, it looks like JVR can strap an egg to his chest, and by the end of the game, it'd still not be cracked.
True.
I did want to say we're gonna wrap. I know we're getting close to wrapping this up. I did want to just touch on one thing as far as just following up on the Provorov potential trying to trade him thing. I mean, we talked about him. We didn't really dive into would the Flyers trade him. I did talk to a source outside the organization, talking about the Flyers, offering him around, and they have. The Flyers have put feelers out. What would you trade?
For which guy again, Anthony? I lost
for Provorov. Provorov. I do know that that LA checked in. The Flyers were not happy with the offer that LA made. Flyers said something back, and LA was reluctant, and they said, "Okay, well, you call us when you're ready." The Flyers, from what I was told, want a top 6 forward, either with a pedigree or one that will projects out to that spot. So they're looking, if they're going to trade Provorov, they want to fill one of those needs for up top in the front of the lineup, and that they are not going to settle for less than that at this point.
Well, they may have to hang on to him then. And
in which case they would. In which case they would hang on to him. And that's why I said I'm not certain that a team will go that far. Maybe they look at it at the deadline in 6 weeks and say, yeah, we're ready to go. We're ready to make this push, and we think Provorov is a difference maker for us on the blue line, and they're able to make that deal. But I don't see it. I think it's more of an off-season kind of setup.
What about a Ristolainen, Anthony? Is that a deadline type of move, or is that contract just? No, I'm asking. I don't know, because sometimes you get somebody who's so desperate at a trade deadline that may be the time where you dump a salary like that.
I think that you would have to, because of there's terms still left on that contract, you would have to be willing to eat some of the money. And I think that the only player that they would probably be willing to do that with right now is Kevin Hayes, because it's even more money, right? And if I look at a team, look at Colorado, for example, right? I mean, here's the defending Stanley Cup champ that was decimated this year with injuries, never really replaced Nazem Kadri after he left. That's a team that is now going to start getting their better players back. McKinnon just came back. Eventually, Landeskog is going to get back into that lineup. They're right now outside the playoffs and trying to get back in, right? And they're in their window to potentially win multiple cups. They won one, and they would like to win more. So they're in that window. Maybe you look at a team like that and say, hey, Kevin Hayes might be a nice fit as a third-line center for them to kind of replace
Winnipeg did that too a few years ago.
Yeah,
remember how that ended up?
Yeah, but it wasn't as big a contract. But I think with the Flyers, if you're the Flyers, would you say to Colorado, "Well, you take Hayes, we will pay 50% of the salary for the next 3 years"?
If they do that, Chuck should probably consider driving them there too.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. You don't need to get anything in return other than the cap space. To me, I mean, that's the thing. Like the cap space is the reward in the trade. So, I mean, I think that's the one. Usually you don't see guys with term get traded at the deadline. And I mean, maybe another year on their contract, okay. But you usually don't see guys with 3-4 years left on their contract get moved at the deadline.
This is not an ordinary team, Anthony. It's not. We talked about 4 defensemen for $26 million, right? That's not normal situation. So if you can dump a guy like D'Angelo, somebody might take him at the deadline.
Now that's a more likely situation because he's only got 1 year left on his
right.
So that I could see. I could see somebody taking Tony. I just don't see Risto because the contract goes a couple of years beyond. I just don't see it. And Provorov, I think it's the same thing. Now, can you maybe move one of those guys in the off season? Because now all of a sudden you're one less year on the deal. And maybe make something work because the teams can exceed the cap by 10% in the offseason, and they can work. I mean, and there's more teams to be involved. And then at the deadline, you're only working with the contenders, right? In the offseason, there's all 32 teams that are involved. So maybe then you could potentially do it, but I do not see it. I just don't see any of those guys really moving unless you are willing to pay a portion of their salary and have it count against your cap for the term that they have, in which case you could really only do one guy that way. And I think that they want to move Hayes more than they want to move anybody else. And so therefore that would be the one that they would be willing to eat some money.
But there's a black Minnesota cloud that looms large over this whole situation. And his name is Chuck Fletcher. So I don't understand. I keep coming back to this whole thing, and I feel like I've said the phrase "make it make sense" more this year than ever before. And there's a legitimate part of me that fears that if the Flyers were to keep up some of these winning ways, that he's going to manage to save his job again, despite the fact that winning is the worst thing for them right now. And a draft that has 4 or 5 really solid players, very good players. Some are saying 5-star players at the top of this draft, one generational talent. You're effectively taking yourself out of that right now. He's going to probably look at the standings and say, I could acquire a couple of pieces here. We can make a run to the playoffs, and I can save my job. And I sit here and I say, all right, once again, if we're looking at what's the best for this organization going forward, it's not to make the playoffs, and it's not to be a bubble team that just misses the playoffs. It can't happen. If that's the case, then trading a guy like Ivan Provorov does make sense, because if you are able to get something of value for him, maybe it helps you kickstart that rebuild that you need to do. But Chuck Fletcher shouldn't be the one to make that trade, and he shouldn't be the one to oversee the rebuild. I keep coming back to the same question again and again and again. Why would this organization put themselves in the position once again to have this man making the decisions and making the moves for the next few years in these next few months?
The answer to that question is Dave Scott relies on the same voices to tell him that Chuck deserves more time, even though he doesn't. And there is certainly a disconnect in the organization as far as that is concerned. There are people who believe that Chuck needs to go, and there are people who are telling Dave that Chuck needs to stay. And right now I think that Dave Scott is in a spot where he doesn't know what to do. And that's just as bad as making a decision one way or the other. I mean, really, like not knowing, it kind of freezes everything, right? I mean, you don't know who to trust in the franchise. You have people, and I said this on the podcast before, I'm not going to go into a whole diatribe about it again, but you have people who are rooting for each other to fail within the organization. And so therefore you need to find a way to resolve that. And by doing nothing, by being unsure, being unwilling to pull the trigger, you've kind of left yourself in a spot where this team at the end of the year, if it stays the course, is going to be in the same exact spot it was last year going into the off season. Yeah, you might know a little bit more about a couple of young players, but at the same time, it's no different. You're in the same spot you were a year earlier. Why do that? I mean, it's the definition of insanity is, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, right? I mean, and that's really where we've gotten to this point with the Flyers. So sometimes change just needs to be made for change's sake. Just for the sake of change, it needs to happen. In this case, it's more than that. But they're sitting us in a spot where I think it's just uncertainty, and he needs to make a decision. And he needs to make a decision one way or the other. Even if we disagree with it, at least if he makes a decision the other way, at least the team knows where it's going, and you maybe get people trying at that point. Okay, the guy's not going to fire him. I guess I should try and help my general manager win at this point, as opposed to I'd like to see my general manager gone so that we could do something different, right? I mean, at the very least, that's the bare minimum, right?
Yeah, and I think Torts probably has a bigger voice in there now than he may have the first couple months or even in the summer.
Yeah,
I think he's probably saying, "Okay, I'm coaching this thing. I'm going to start tossing my." And we've talked. He's been hard on GMs everywhere he's been to try to up the ante to make the team better. And it sure seems like since we talked, guys, that he absolutely has a hand in every discussion that goes on now with both player personnel, incoming trade, whatever trades, possibilities, whatever. I think he is privy to all that information.
And I will say this: I think, and you're absolutely right, Bundy, because I can remember back in, I want to say early November, somebody from the organization sent me a text that said, John Tortorella will not tell us how to manage our team. And that same person, in conversation with them a week and a half ago, talked glowingly about Torts and knowing about what this team needs going forward. And so it's so funny that it was 2 months ago the guy is not going to tell us how to run the team, and now it's like, oh, maybe he knows what he's talking about. So I it's really kind of interesting how that goes. But Russ, before we get to the 5 stars, and I know usually you're the guy running the show and dictating, I think we have to talk about 2 non-hockey related things. All right. Okay. First, and Bundy mentioned it off the top, and we should let you make your big announcement about being a dad again. Little Dino. And it's Dino. Everybody knows it's Dino. Kyle Scott, who doesn't think that people would know Dino is Dino. But talk us through how did it go? It was kind of a crazy week for you, I know. But how did everything go with the little Dino coming into the fold?
He's a good kid. He's a good baby. His mom's tough. His mom is very, very tough. It was a strange set of circumstances because she went into labor on the 6th. And the 7th is our second son's birthday. So I kept kind of pushing for like, all right, look, if labor's actually happening, like, let's get to the hospital. You know, we got like 5 hours. Get this kid out before he falls on our other son's birthday, you know, because I'm an idiot. And I'm like, you know, you totally will these things to happen. And so, well, it obviously did not happen. So he came into the world at like 2:20 in the morning on the 7th. So now we have two sons who share the same birthday, who are exactly 6 years apart. But all the kids are enamored with little Dino. They love him to death, and they all want to hold him all the time. And he's a cute kid. He's got a little mohawk. He's got like the natural mohawk. So it's something. I definitely forgot what these sleepless nights feel like. I can't complain. I'm not the one that is his food source. So I try to make my wife as comfortable as possible through all that. And, but it's good. Happy that he's here and he's healthy and she's healthy and everything's good.
That's awesome. Well, congratulations from both of us. And I'm sure from the entire Snow the Goalie community. And the other issue now that we got the good Russ story out of the way, let's get the bad Russ story out of the way. So Bundy needs to talk to you, right? And he decides to give you a call, and you decide you cannot talk to him at a specific time because you're in the bathroom. So I want you to defend yourself for a second that you cannot answer the phone while you are in the bathroom, because I do it all the time. Bundy does it all the time. People do it all the time. You talk on the phone. People don't need to know that that's where you're at, but I mean, you can do it. It's not like you're FaceTiming while you're there, right? So you could have this conversation. I want you to defend it, and then I want to throw it out to the audience and see how people respond in the Snow the Goalie community. Put it on Twitter, mention it in a 5-star review, whatever. I want to know what people think. Can you or can you not use the phone while you're in the bathroom?
It's a violation.
No, it's not.
I can't even believe this. I can't even believe this is a conversation. It's disgusting.
It's not.
I don't.
Not like it was this year, Russ.
Where the hell is that?
What is that right there?
For the people who are listening on the podcast feed, Bundy just showed a picture of two toilets next to each other.
Could you imagine? I saw that in Europe once. I'm like, what the hell is this? Like, what do? You just sit there and you look over like, hey, what's going on, guy?
Oh, just got one out. How about you? Oh, I don't know. I've been hoping. Crossing my fingers.
I mean, Russ, somebody calls you and they're in the bathroom, pick up the phone.
No.
Nobody's going to know. It's not like there's like some bathroom dude looking over you going, oh my God, he answered the phone in the bathroom.
There's a fan running.
You had your phone in the bathroom with you to begin with.
Fan running. There's a fan running.
Turn the fan off.
Why would I turn the fan off? If you're sitting on it, listen, if you're sitting on a toilet because you gotta get to business, you don't then stand up, crab walk across the bathroom, and go shut off the fan and be like, hi, Bundy, what's up? No, I'll call you back in like 2 minutes, which is what I said. And this apparently has, negatively impacted the perception of the elders here, who apparently just want to, pinch off a turd while on the phone with each other. I mean, listen, if you guys want to have some potty talk, by all means, you can. I just don't want to be part of it.
Jesus, Russ.
God, come on, Russ. Oh, it's hysterical, man. I don't know. I have zero problem.
My colleague goes, I can't talk. I'm in the bathroom.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah. What's your point? That's great stuff. Pick up the phone.
Believe how beside yourself you were. You're just like, what does that have to do with anything? He was in the bathroom. This is too much talk about the bathroom at the end of the podcast.
All right, good stuff. Listen, get the 5-star.
It was a crappy situation to be in. All right, we had 1 5-star review from last week.
We have 2, don't we?
We have 1.
Check again, my friend.
No, it's Elise seeing another one.
No.
So this one is from
Go ahead.
Scotty BSQ. Still waiting for a cup. Love this podcast. Best mix of personalities, giving varied perspectives from the veteran writer to the informed host to the former player broadcaster who knows the organization. Say hi to your brother-in-law, Vince, from his old coworker, Scott. These guys make following the Flyers fun despite the continued failures on the ice. That being said, at least this year's product is watchable thanks to Torts. Last year was the first time I purposely skipped watching games as I found it to be excruciating.
Yeah, you're right. The other one we did read already.
That's right. Once again, Russ is right. Thank you so much for listening.
So make sure you say hi to your brother-in-law, Bundy, apparently, right?
I don't even know what he's talking about. Anyway, it's one of those like, yeah, say hi to your brother-in-law for me. Yeah, all right. Yeah, I'll get on that. Thanks for the great review.
The next time you're on the toilet, let your brother-in-law know.
I'll tell you one thing, Russ. I'm going to have to make sure I put you in my Rolodex of what time I can call you at. I blocked you off from 9:30 to 10 from now, and don't call Russ.
We'll create a status update on the toilet. All right. Anyway, thanks for listening to Snow the Goalie, watching Snow the Goalie on the Crossing Broad YouTube channel. Find us, follow us wherever you can. All the links are in the description of this episode for Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. So for Ant, for Bundy, I'm Russ. Thanks for listening, maybe even watching. We'll talk to you next week.
See you guys.